Hi, this is Eternal King here, bringing you another LOR video today. I wanted to talk about the value of dead games. So, a lot of people, myself included, who are a part of the core competitive scene of LOR, have branded this game to be dying, essentially. Now, that's not 100% accurate, but what people are referring to is the dichotomy of popularity between Path of Champions and the remainder of the actual legacy LOR competitive community. If you put out a video on Path of Champions, you'll probably get, 40,000 views pretty easily. For example, about Fiddlesticks, the new champion. And then if you put out a video about core competitive LOR, and you'll probably get, 2,000 views. And the reality is, creating an actual competitive brew or a competitive deck in a card game is actually exceptionally difficult. And then when I say competitive brew, I'm talking about a deck that you have climbed with or played enough times to show representative stats that your version of that deck is the best. It's actually very, very hard to do. It is not easy at all, otherwise people would do it all the time. And even in the competitive community, they do not in fact do it all the time. I'll give you an example. In Eternal, there are a million champions in this quote-unquote dead card game that simply do not have constructed decks built for them. So for example, in Eternal, there is no Shen deck with a 50% plus win rate currently, unless you want to go ahead and build that and make that a thing. There is not currently a Yasuo deck with a 50% plus win rate in Eternal, unless you want to go ahead and build that. And so really the point of this video is that same thing with like Master Yi or Ahiri or Kennen or Lilia. The point being is that like even in a dead card game, there is an exceptional amount of unplucked value when it comes to deck construction. And as if you come at it from the approach that you don't really care how many views you get, that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of fleshing out a lot of these archetypes. And that is kind of the value of a good dead card game. You think about something like Gwent. Gwent is still going strong thanks largely to the player community. People are playing Gwent, building decks, and showcasing those decks to this day. Despite the fact that, the servers are largely just being hosted privately. Because the fundamentals of that game were strong. I enjoyed Gwent personally on a competitive level back when it was like old Gwent. I guess there was like Gwent 1.0, Gwent 2.0, and then now Gwent 3.0. I was in there on 2.0. Basically when it was popular among the likes of like Mega Mogwai and Swim and them, I also played and experimented with that card game. But to this day, people still play it because it is fundamentally unique. It is fundamentally competitive. Unlike something like Marvel Snap, which is like basically just a Skinner box simulation. Hearthstone, MTG Arena, Gwent, and then of course Legends of Runeterra are in fact real card games that are competitive and diverse and interesting. They're just also not popular. It's very, very sad to say that obviously Hearthstone's no longer in its heyday. MTG Arena is currently, most of the standard sets recently for MTG have been kind of who cares, and Legend of Runeterra has gone entirely single player, and then Gwent has really hasn't found a way forward at all. So I would say Gwent is probably the biggest loser currently. But there is still value, right? If you can make Poro King work competitively in Eternal right now, hopefully without Temple as a crutch, that would be a fundamentally really unique and interesting thing. And how would you make Poro King a thing in this dead card game that supposedly has no room for movement? Well, you would have to win 8 out of 10 games with a Poro King construction, and then have your account be tracked and then show off those stats before they would be considered for the format. The same thing with Undir. Same thing with Vi. Same thing with Vladimir. That it fundamentally, like, it sounds exceptionally simple to do, but it's not, because Eternal is a very constrictive format, very competitive format. Even more so than Standard, I would say Eternal is the most competitive in terms of the exact ratioing and the exact way you build an archetype. It is very, very restrictive. Otherwise, anyone would build decks in Eternal, and they tend not to. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you're going to go on a tear with an archetype, and sometimes you're not, and it's largely going to be meta dependent. Viego, right? You want to start running Viego Atrocity again. You want to start running Galio Formidable again. You want probably not Malphite, probably not that. You want to start running like a Volibear ramp solution, and you're confident that you can win 8 out of 10 games. Strictly off of, Relentless Storm and Volibear procs. So, like, this is the value of dead card games. And the same thing with Ornn. And I would say the value of, like, just dead competitive games in general. Obviously I played a lot of TF2 when it was at its most popular. And like, comparatively, I would say that TF2 is a dead game, but it still has value because it is a fundamentally unique competitive experience. So, like, personally, I will be around on LOR while I play other games, just for like the foreseeable future, as long as they can afford to keep the lights on, essentially. I will be here playing LOR, and then every now and then, when I find a breakout archetype that is like overperforming in the Eternal format, that I can kind of revitalize and bring back to the forefront, that's exactly what I'm going to do. It could be, Garen, right? I bring back Garen Elites, and it's like, I can win, a decent percentage of games with Garen. There's just so many examples of archetypes that are worth revitalizing and worth revisiting, in the Eternal format. Now, when it comes to Standard, Standard decks are always transient, and I never tend to pay much attention to them because, they come and go. Right? But the thing about an Eternal deck is that because it basically functionally includes the entire selection of cards at all times, any deck that you can make competitively viable in Eternal is competitively viable forever, right? Like, if you can bring back Lysandra in a big way in this quote-unquote dead card game, and you can make Thralls a thing. If you can find that super competitive and edgy Thralls construction, that's coming back forever, right? Like, that's just like in the rotation now of Eternal forever. Right? You bring back Jinx Lulu with like Flame Chomper spam. That's just like a thing forever now. You bring back Star Springs with Soraka and Tom Kench, and you're able to, again, you have to. It's not just about playing the deck and winning, 1 game, 2 games. In fact, deck swapping in general, every game, really doesn't do anything. In terms of the long-term health of the game. Like, if you're trying to climb and you find that random swaps works, absolutely. Do whatever works for climbing. But climbing is not very hard in general. But yeah, when it comes to trying to get deck tracked, you do have to commit a little bit to an archetype. And that means winning it in a lot of different matchups. You're going to have to feel comfortable in the mid-range. You're going to have to feel comfortable into tempo, and you're going to have to feel comfortable into anti-tempo. And those are kind of the big 3 points that you're going to have to target in Eternal specifically. Say you want to bring back Heimer in a big way, right? Competitive Heimer. Heimer Jace or something, and you're confident you can win with like Heimer Jace with like 3 Vengeances. That could be a thing, right? You want to bring back Leona Stun. So Daybreak Leona, you're confident you can win, 80% of games with Daybreak Leona. Go nuts, right? Like, make that a thing. So, like, that's the value of dead card games, specifically. Is that as the number of people who are playing the game constricts, there's actually more room to personally impact the metagame. Right? It's much easier to choose an archetype and just slap your stamp on it because there's really no one else who is competitively capable of doing so. There's not many people left, strictly speaking, right? You're basically one person who gets, 1,000 views on a video versus another person who gets 1,000 views on a video, fighting over, a dead card game with archetypes that no one's paying attention to. But, you own that, right? You're not making any money on videos, but at the end of the day, you're owning that space. Right, that 80% Nico deck that you whip out in Eternal is going to be your Nico deck, and it's going to be there forever. And as long as the Skinner box mechanics remain in LOR, which is of course Path of Champions, as long as all this like gotcha mechanic, constellation, blah 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 stuff remains, they're going to be filing money into keeping the servers alive. It's very obvious that the new LOR team doesn't care about PvP beyond keeping the servers alive, but they're doing that, right? They are in fact keeping the servers alive. So you have your world adventures, and then you have your nightmare campaign, and an entirely single player experience that nobody but you really needs to care about. That's just your own personal journey of powering up and navigating the game. Because at the end of the day, creating truly competitive new decks is exceptionally difficult. If it wasn't, everybody would do it. Speaking even of just like, Sunny, he would have no incentive for doing so, but if he wanted to create, put in the time to take a deck to an 80% win rate, there's a lot of room for archetypes that is just not being touched, right? If he wanted to make that 80% win rate Bard deck in Eternal, he could, assuming he had the ability to do so, he could actually fundamentally do that, because there's no room for anyone to challenge him on that front, because there is no competitive Bard deck with an 80% win rate. So if he managed to capture that, then he would be, he'd be set. Even Zed, I think, is completely unplayed right now in Eternal. So there's massive room for essentially permanently stamping archetype competitiveness, right? In terms of any given season. Anivia, right? You want to make that reborn Anivia deck competitive, right? And 80% win rate is just like one touch point. Very few people actually reach that. Most people are like, I would say like 60 to 70 with their brews and standard. And that's standard, where like you can just play whatever you want because it's all just creature tempo. So yeah, most people are just like, I represented 70% win rate on my standard brew of random stuff. And like that's good enough. Or, 68%, 67%. You don't need 80% specifically. I would say that in Eternal, even if you just represent like 67% with your given archetype, your given dead archetype in your dead card game, that's good enough. So I believe like Renekton Sundisk is a great example, right? Where someone popularized Renekton Sundisk, replacing traditional Sundisk. And that deck, globally has a win rate of 58%, but I imagine the person that played it probably represented something closer to like 68%, just in terms of his own ability to pilot his deck. Your ability to pilot your own deck is always going to be higher than everyone else's, because you're going to know what you're trying to hit and the cards you need to curve into and your win cons and things like that. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today. I want right now to discuss the value of dead card games, right? So if the competitive scene in LOR is essentially dead on the scale of like a Gwent, for example, being dead in the same respect Gwent is, it doesn't mean it's that dead. That's kind of the big difference between competitive games and that have good fundamentals and other competitive games that don't, is that a truly dead game would be something like Concord, right? They released Concord, they spent several million producing the game. It lasted live on servers for like 2 weeks and then it was gone. That's not LOR, right? LOR is going to be funded through its Skinner box mechanics in Path of Champions, and its gotcha mechanics and whatever you want to, however you want to describe that, it's going to be funded through that, and that means that we get to keep playing the actual real game, possibly for another 5 years, and that means that any deck or archetype that you want to personally revitalize, assuming that you have the deck building abilities, the gumption, the persistence, all of that stuff, to say make Nami win 70% of games in Eternal, then you can slap your mark on a deck, same as anyone, really. You just need to have the skill to do so in this dead card game. All right, this is Eternal King, signing out.